Welcome to the Power of One. I am Melany Nelson, the Executive Director for Northwest Victim Services. This episode of the Power of One will focus on victim services through the District Attorney's Office. There are hundreds of victims that have to attend court weekly, and it could be the most trying experience of their life. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Kenziah Cameron, who is the newly appointed Director of Victim Services at the District Attorney's Office. Welcome, Kenziah.
Thank you for having me now.
You are welcome. Kenziah, tell me how long you've been with the District Attorney's Office and walk me through a little bit of the history of victim services at the District Attorney's Office.
So I've been with the District Attorney's Office for 17 years now. When I started, it was 2013. At 2003, not 2013.
Okay.
Victim services, the movement was just getting really strong at the federal level. And so before I started, victim services at the DA's office had been mostly reactive, and there were just a few coordinators and just the MC unit and the homicide unit.
Tell people what the MC unit is.
I'm sorry, municipal court.
Okay.
So when someone is arrested and they have felony charges, they are charged with a felony, they have the right to a preliminary hearing. And so all of those cases come through municipal court. But the only time victims were reached out to, well, they weren't. If they called our office for services, then they received services. But when I was hired as one of the first outreach coordinators in an effort to reach out to victims and assess their needs.
Okay.
And the unit grew from there. When I started, there were about 6 people in victim services, and now they are about 30 between adult and juvenile victim services.
Okay. So how does a preliminary hearing begin, and how does the District Attorney's Office help the victims prepare for their court case?
So, as I mentioned, if a person is arrested and the District Attorney's Office decides to prosecute with felony charges, including misdemeanors, the person has a right to a preliminary hearing, which is not a guilty or not guilty hearing. It's just about we have enough evidence to take this person to court. And I think our municipal court coordinators are some of the most important coordinators that we have, because they're generally the first people that victims and witnesses speak to when they start their journey through the criminal justice process. So we have 2 outreach coordinators who try to call each victim or witness about 2 weeks beforehand and just explain the process and assess if there's any needs, transportation, interpreters, answer questions, and let them know about services available in the courthouse, like the community-based agencies that staff the preliminary hearing rooms, our victim witness waiting room, that sort of thing.
So I can imagine that the whole court process can be very intimidating and it could be very fearful for some people. So what does the advocates do to ensure the safety for the victims who are going through the preliminary hearings, even trials and sentencing, because that could be the most trying experience of their life? So what happens when they're fearful? We're not talking about intimidation yet.
Right.
So what
Just
happens
fearful.
when they're fearful to come, because there's no barriers in court. So the defendant is, if the defendant is not apprehended, you could be sitting right next to this defendant doing preliminary hearings. So let's speak to that.
So I think one of our most important jobs as advocates is information, letting the complainant know that, and if there's an issue of fear or safety planning. Talking through the options. If you want to be in the courtroom, do you want someone sitting with you? Letting them know about our separate victim witness waiting area. We have one in each courtroom, in each courthouse, family court and adult court, and they're both secure facilities, and only victims, witnesses, and their support are allowed in that room. letting them know they can bring anyone they want with them, and just giving them the information and the options that make them feel comfortable and letting them make that choice.
Okay. I do know for a while, when you went into the courthouse, that the phones were apprehended of everyone who was coming in, whether it was defendant, their family, victims, their
Correct.
families. That is not taking place anymore. What happened
No.
with that? Why aren't they doing that anymore?
That was a decision that the courthouse made. I'm not sure what precipitated that, but that was a decision that the court decided to no longer do. But we also altered our the way we giving that information to the complainants to let them know that they no longer had to have their phones confiscated or locked up when they came to court. Surprisingly, a lot of complainants were happy with the change.
Really?
Because they didn't understand why the policy was in place to begin with. And, we explained to them that there had been in the past intimidation happening in the courtrooms via the phones, but phones are people's safety blanket now.
True.
And so they rather have their phones with them. They feel more comfortable having access to their phones. And honestly, it makes them feel safer.
Okay.
So.
Okay. So tell me, when you were appointed the director for victim services at the district attorney's office.
I was appointed in December, and I had been acting director for the previous 6 months.
Okay.
And so now I'm just trying to continue what I started.
Okay. So how many positions did you hold since you've been at the district attorney's office?
Well, I've always been a victim advocate, but I have worked in the municipal court as a victim advocate. I've worked in both waiting rooms, the one at the Criminal Justice Center and Family Court when it was at 1801.
Okay.
I was the B Court coordinator, which is 5F now in Family Court. It handles the cases in Philadelphia where there is a child or a minor complainant and someone who is being charged or is an adult, being charged as an adult or is an adult. I was also a juvenile coordinator in juvenile court, and I worked with the diversion unit and the pretrial unit, and I think that's pretty much it. So, but I've run the gamut
Right.
of victim advocacy in the DA's office, and I think that is one of the things that fuels what I do, because I've seen it from almost all of the angles. And so it's one of the things that encourages me to continue to improve our services, because it can be different.
Right. Right.
Depending on where you are in the system.
Right. So since coming on as the director, did you see anything that needed to be changed immediately for victims that you implemented?
So one of the things is, like I said, we now have 2 outreach coordinators in MC. The last position I held before becoming the director was a coordinator in MC, and it was really hard to do a proper needs assessment when you had to worry about doing outreach and services as well, answering questions and returning calls, and the needs of the DAs with the specially assigned cases. And so I felt by just having people dedicated to outreach, not only would we be able to reach victims and witnesses sooner, because like you said, you're talking about a process that can be challenging and confusing, and sometimes they weren't getting contacted until the night before to say, you need to come to court, and you don't have a choice, and you have to tell your job something. And so I felt even a week before was not enough time. So 2 weeks ahead of time, they call, they talk to the victims and witnesses about what's going to happen, the process, because I've learned that that's one of the most important things. When people know what to expect, they're more comfortable, they feel more in control, and a lot of this process takes a lot of control from them. So we're giving some of that back. making sure they are in a comfortable space and have enough time to make the appropriate arrangements to come to court. So that was one of the changes that I have made, trying to get that done earlier and make us more accessible. Another thing was we have all of the coordinators now have work cell phones.
Okay.
Because we were just making outreach through voice and regular desk phones. And working in
Right.
victim services, you are rarely at your desk. There's
Right.
always something that you have to do. And even if you are, most people don't answer the phone for phone numbers they don't know.
Right, which is true.
And so I thought having more options for complainants to contact us via email, via text message, and via phone, it works better for the coordinators and it works better for the victims and witnesses. And also putting their email address on letters. We're always on our email because we're always on our phone.
Right.
So in a case of an emergency, or even if it's not an emergency, I'll probably get your email before I get your voicemail.
Okay.
And so just giving them as many options as possible on getting in touch with the coordinator who can actually assist them. Training the call center, the 8,000 number, because I found that they sometimes were not sure which coordinator, because like I said, there's 30 of us, there's
Right.
a large office, which coordinator should handle. And so much of the frustration that I came across with victims and witnesses wasn't how the case was handled, but the fact that they got bounced to 4 or 5 different people, when if you know exactly who this person should go to the first time, you can alleviate so
You
much
wouldn't have that.
stress.
So there's a 1-800 number?
Not 1-800, the main number to the DA's office
Okay.
is 686-8000.
Okay.
And so the ladies who answer that number are amazing, and they work with us very hard to make sure that complainants get to who they need to get to the first time. Just furthering that information, furthering their knowledge of what we do and which coordinators handle what things, just has helped a lot.
Right. So now with the advocates having cell phones and emails, are they responding after hours or on the weekends or?
I have not come across a situation where an advocate has said to me that they're getting this information or they're getting calls on the weekend or after hours. So I can't tell you
Okay.
for sure, but I do know that we are always on. I know
Right.
I respond on the weekends and
Right,
after
yeah,
hours and on
yeah.
the holidays. And
Right.
so the people that work in victim services work there because they want to be helpful,
Right.
because they want to help people. And so I can't imagine if someone reaches out after hours or on the weekend that they would ever be
Get a
turned
response,
away.
which is great. I mean, and you and I have worked in the evening, so at least someone is responding from the district attorney's office. At least someone is responding from Northwest Victim Services
Right.
after hours and
Right.
and on a weekend. So which is important. So what would you say your long-term goals are for victim services in the district attorney's office on how we can improve? And like you said, sometimes there are, and I don't know whether you can speak to this, there are victims who are not satisfied or who are not pleased with the outcome of their case, whether it was a deal or what have you. How do you handle that situation? And then we can speak to your long-term goals.
So for that situation, I think the best thing that we can do is manage expectations. One of the things that I tell my complainants in the beginning is always be honest with your complainants. We are there as their voice. We are there to make sure that their voice and their concerns are being heard when the DAs are making decisions about these cases. But when it comes down to it, it is ultimately the decision of the DA what happens. The victim or witness, the complainant, they have their right to be considered in that decision. They have the right to be heard in that decision, but letting them know from the beginning, you have the right for me to advocate for how you'd like to see this case handled. You have the right for the DA to consider that and hear that when making that decision, but also having them understand that ultimately, it comes down to a lot of factors and the decision is in the hands of the DAs. Letting them know that from the beginning, making sure they're heard from the beginning, because oftentimes it's not, a lot of people are displeased and they want it to be a certain way, but I found the majority of people who were displeased about the way that the case turned out were people who were not notified, who did not get a chance to give input, who were not heard.
Right. So then you have the advocates at the district attorney's office, and then you have the ADAs who are the ones that are fighting the case.
Right.
So your advocates are reaching out to them on a daily basis because the ADAs are in court. So I do say that to a lot of the victims that may contact Northwest Victim Services when they're saying, I can't get in touch with my ADA. Well, yes, let me put you in contact with the victim advocate at the district attorney's office, because they're going to be the ones to keep that line of communication open.
Right, and the DAs, especially in our larger units, the schedule can fluctuate, and so you should just have someone that you always know, they know what's going on with your case, and they are the steady person for you. We are the ones, yes, that do advocate with the DAs who have the cases to let them know when there are issues and concerns, and so we should be constant.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit, let's go back to the intimidation, which we know is real. And we know a lot of people do not come to court because they're in fear for their life. So what happens, or what does the district attorney's office have in place for some victims that may need to be relocated?
So we have a relocation program, but the relocation program is a case-by-case basis, and it is up to the assistant district attorney who is handling the case to bring that case to the one of our relocation coordinators, who will work with that DA to see if that case is eligible for our relocation program.
Okay. And it's sad because it has to be an ongoing threat. So it just can't be, oh, I need to relocate, which I know, some are touchy, but in reaching out to the district attorney's office, I will say this, and working with some of the employees there who work with the relocation, you guys have been dynamic.
Well, we try. It's not, we have limited resources, but like I said, it is a case-by-case basis, and they do their best. We always do our best, which is, I think, generally all you can ask for,
right, Right, which is important, because you can't please everybody.
You cannot.
But as long as you know that I'm going to try my best to be able to help you.
And then follow through with that,
Yes,
then I think that most of the time for people, that is enough.
Okay, which is excellent. So tell me what you would say to those victims and the victims' families who has felt like they've lost hope because they weren't satisfied with their case. What encouraging message would you have for them?
I try to think that even if you are not satisfied with the outcome of the case, you are satisfied with the services you receive throughout the process. If that is the case, then I've done my job. Right. I can't make you feel other than how you feel. And as a family member, someone who is going through the process, I cannot even begin to put myself in their place. So to tell them how they should feel about the outcome, that's not even something that I could begin to think about. The only thing that I can say is, if you are satisfied with the services that you've received throughout the case, then I've done my job.
Right. Now, are you getting out in the community more? with Victim Services?
I am. One of the things that I would love to improve, and I've been working to improve, is our community advocacy and our ties within the community with the community-based agencies who partner with us. When we work closer together, it's better for the victims and witnesses. There's easier communication for us, easier referrals, and the community, so that they see that someone there does care. And so we have been going out to the community more. We've been encouraging our community partners to come and collaborate with us and invite us to their spaces, because it wasn't something that was previously done with frequency. So I'm trying to encourage more of that.
Which is, I think, is important, and to be able to build that relationship and cultivate that relationship with communities, because unfortunately they may not have a good relationship with how things were done at the district attorney's office in the past, or even like sometimes there are communities that have a problem with law enforcement. So it's great to cultivate those relationships, so then that way they can see that they can trust you.
And that's what we're just trying to do. I know that it will take time, and it will take a lot of effort on our part to change a lot of that dialogue, but as long as they see the proof behind the words, as long as we walk the walk, then they will come to trust that there is somebody who is in their corner. They will come to trust that there is an advocate at the DA's office for them. And so that is my goal.
Okay. Now, do you work closely with victims, or it's just your advocates and you oversee them?
So a little bit of both. If I am always, like I said, always accessible. If a victim or witness wants to speak to a supervisor, or if I am on hand, I am always available to speak directly to victims and witnesses, to work with them. I am a strong believer in your person should be your person. So if they decide I am their person, then that is what it is. So, but yes, I also supervise, because I am one person, and so I cannot be that person for all of our victims and witnesses, and it wouldn't be fair to them anyway, because I have wonderful staff who enjoy advocating for the complainants and the citizens in the city. So I do a little bit of both.
Okay, which is great. So do you see like the crime being high in a certain area of the city at this particular time? Because gun violence, we know, is a public health crisis right now, and it's just unbelievable. But what section of the city would you say is like the highest, and where you're servicing more victims?
Honestly, the crime rate in the city is higher than in all sections of the city. In each section, I think you'll find that some crimes can occur a little bit more than others, but everywhere, everywhere all over Philadelphia, it's an epidemic, like you said.
Yeah, it's horrible. And I'm born, raised, and still reside in West Oak Lane.
Oh, well, not West Oak Lane,
West Philly,
but North Philly.
You're North Philly. And it's unbelievable. Like coming up, I don't remember seeing gun violence on the news every day and multiple times throughout the day. And now it's just like, it's just unbelievable.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. Like I said, I was born and raised in North Philly, so unfortunately that is not new for me. But just because it is not new for me doesn't make it any less traumatizing to live through it and go through it now, just like it doesn't make the citizens in West Oak Lane, it doesn't make any difference. However you are exposed to it, how often you are exposed to it, if you are not traumatized, then there is a problem.
Right. And now that you say that, sometimes we go into the schools. And we educate the students on victimization and bullying. Kenziah, it is so alarming that a lot of children have seen someone being murdered.
You're right.
Or being shot.
You're right.
And they're not alarmed. They're not, you know what I mean, bent out of shape, which is horrible.
Right.
And we don't want this to become the norm for our young people.
I agree, and that is another reason I'm so passionate about where we are in victim services now, and going out in the community now, because we also go to the schools, and so many people in our communities, and when I say our communities, I do mean the inner city communities of Philadelphia, have grown up with that being the norm and don't realize that they are in crisis and they are suffering from traumatization and sometimes post-traumatic stress, and educating people on those signs and letting them know it is okay and options on how to deal with it, educating the youth about gun violence and about not only the impact that it can have on them, but others, not just the victims and witnesses' family, but the person who pulled out the gun. Their family is forever affected as well. And I think a lot of that is so important. It is so important, that education and that prevention and that giving those resources at the root, because not only does it cut out crime, it cuts out some of the impact of crime, but it lessens the amount of victims and witnesses who come into the system as well.
Right, which I think is really important. So we have to talk to everyone who's involved, the victim, the person who has done the victimization, and we have to understand why these things are taking place.
I agree. And sometimes it's not even understanding why, because a lot of times there is no why. And that's one of the things that I tell some of my families too. You know, you drive yourself crazy wondering why. It's how can we stop?
Right. Yeah. And we need to stop gun violence in the city of Philadelphia. So I want to thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It was such a pleasure.
I appreciate it. Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Power of One. If you are a victim of a crime, or if you know someone who was a victim of a crime, and the crime occurred in the northwest section of Philadelphia, please contact me directly at 267-808-0350. If you require court accompaniment to the Criminal Justice Center for courtrooms 803 or 306, you can contact me at the same number, 267-808-0350. If you need assistance in another courtroom, you can contact me and I will provide you the information to the community-based agency in your area. Know that you are important, you are special, and you are unique. Your voice matters, and you could be the one to change the world. The power of one starts with you. Thank you for joining us.